Parenting a child that has obsessive compulsive disorder is a really tough job. It can be heartbreaking seeing your child suffering and struggling to combat their obsessions and compulsions. As a parent, if you build expertise and can become therapeutic in how you guide your child, you can help them overcome OCD while they are still young and their brain is very shapeable. Welcome to Root Cause of Happiness. I'm Dr. Sarah Bryn Morrow, licensed psychologist, therapeutic yoga teacher, and optimal wellness educator. I teach the physiology of mental health and the skills to overcome suffering at the root cause. My intention is to empower others to become increasingly resilient by understanding the many pieces of the puzzle to deep healing. Please join me as we explore the root cause of happiness. Obsessive Compulsive Disorder is a fairly complex mental health condition, and we're really still learning a lot about it through scientific research. But we know enough to know how to help our child rewire the brain and nervous system to slowly overcome OCD as they build their own coping skills and understanding of how their brain works and how they can reshape the brain over time. I will immediately recommend a book by Dr. Bonnie Zucker, Take Control of OCD. It's an excellent read that covers cognitive behavioral therapy techniques for parents and children to be strategic in addressing their OCD difficulties. OCD typically originates with anxiety. I think of OCD as being a behavioral manifestation, a way that a person tried to find ways to deal with overwhelming anxiety. People who have OCD tend to have intrusive, obsessive thoughts, not just an occasional worry, but this nagging, relentless, terrifying image and vision of awful things happening. They, from that worry, will develop behavioral habits and patterns that they think might protect them from those bad things coming true. This can show up in so many different ways, from fears of germs with worry about health and dying, to religious spiritual fears about sin and going to hell, sexual obsessions that lead a child to feel that they are a bad person. There are so many interesting and unusual ways that OCD presents. I even had a client once who would engage in compulsive walking in circles, that she needed to walk in circles, and it was hours a day. But if she didn't do that, there was a sense of dread that surely something catastrophic would happen if she didn't do her daily walking. It's really endless, the many different ways that OCD can show up. But the way that you know that you have OCD is that you have a lot of intrusive, negative, scary thoughts, dreading what could go wrong, catastrophic things could happen to you or to your loved ones, and that those obsessions have driven you to compulsive behavior that isn't enjoyable. People don't enjoy doing their compulsions, but it takes up a lot of your time and energy. So typically, people that have OCD are spending hours a day eventually just desperately trying to keep the obsessions and anxiety at bay. It's a really miserable existence, and the earlier we can identify a child who has OCD, the more empowered we are to teach that child the skills they need to understand how to reshape their brain and nervous system over time and physiologically rewire their brain away from OCD patterns. I would recommend you go and look at my video on parenting a child with anxiety, and that will give you some more general terms to understand how to empower your child to become an expert on their own anxiety. It's really helpful if we at first can explain to our children how their fight-flight stress response works in their brain and body. How when the brain perceives threat, even if that threat is just coming from thoughts or images in the brain. The brain can get tricked and think that that indicates danger and will sound this alarm that is intended to protect us and keep us away from harm and danger. But sometimes we have false alarms, meaning that there isn't any actual evidence of danger in this moment, but that thought, that idea was so threatening, the brain thought, let's go into fight flight just in case. Let's make sure that you avoid that bad thing happening. So people who have OCD tend to have a lot of scary thoughts and images, and they don't typically know how to redirect their thinking mind or how to boss back those thoughts and reject them altogether. It can be really helpful with all anxiety conditions to externalize that from your child. So rather than saying that your child is anxious or your child has OCD, we can say there's a part of your brain that's not working correctly. There's a little glitch happening up there. And while your brain thinks it's protecting you from harm, it's just confused. And we can give that part of your brain a name and identity and learn who the real bad guy is here and where to direct your energies to fight back. We'll often call OCD like a bully in the brain. This part of the brain that just relentlessly is threatening you, bossing you around, trying to control your behavior and ultimately take your freedom away. When we have intrusive, obsessive thoughts and we develop compulsive behavior habits, we start to lose our freedom. Our world starts to shrink in around us where we truly feel that we can't function normally and do things the way that seemingly other people prefer to do things. We feel totally limited and we've lost empowerment to make choices for ourselves. The anxiety, the obsessions, that voice dictating what we have to do to prevent bad things has really taken control of our lives. If we continue to give in to those compulsive feelings, that voice gets louder, the compulsions tend to expand in complexity, in the amount of time they take up, and OCD can become completely debilitating. That's why it's so important if you see OCD risk factors or early emerging OCD behaviors in your child, that you try to build some expertise or seek some professional help as soon as possible. To understand the neurology and physiology in OCD is really helpful, and it will help your child understand why this is happening to them, to realize they're not alone, that many, many people have OCD, and to also realize the importance of fighting back. So whenever we have anxiety, intrusive, worried thoughts, we want to learn to build awareness and call them out and define that pattern of thinking. So I really recommend with OCD that you right away give OCD a name or identity of some kind, whether we call that kind of, Bob the bugger that just kind of keeps bugging you, or the worry bug, or we might just call it OCD. We give it a name and identity separate from the child themselves. We define the things that entity, that bully in the brain, is saying to your child and how it tricks them into feeling scared. We write down those intrusive, obsessive thoughts. From awareness of that thinking pattern, we try to write down coping thoughts that are ways we can boss back anxiety, to tell it to be quiet, go away, leave me alone. I'm not listening to you anymore. You can't make me do anything, OCD. I refuse to let you boss me around anymore. I'm tired of this. I'm not going to let you bully me and trick me and take my freedom. So we want our kids to kind of get tough against their OCD and realize that that is the bad guy that's making them suffer, not their parent who's trying to encourage them to function more normally, but this part of the brain that is confused and maybe well-intended, wanting to protect us from harm, but is tricking us into false alarm, sense of anxiety and dread. So we want to externalize, give it a name, define the pattern of anxiety thoughts, define coping thoughts to boss back that mental process. From that cognitive work, now we want to move into behavioral therapy that we call exposure with response prevention, or ERP. So what that means is that we have to do some exposure and desensitization work. So we will, with baby steps in little bits our child can handle, expose them to that challenging situation and prevent the compulsive response. What will happen when you do that is that inherently your child will feel anxious. So let's say we have a child who has a fear of germs and they've developed an OCD hand washing compulsion. You will usually know that because your child's hands will become red and dry and cracking or bleeding and painful. If you wash your hands excessively throughout every day, your skin will start to get damaged from that. So we might define this as an OCD issue, recognize the intrusive thoughts around germs or contamination, the bossing back coping thoughts around rational thoughts about healthy hand washing. And then we're going to set a ladder of behavioral goals. So we're not going to tell our child they can't do the compulsion anymore, but we want to reduce the duration or frequency of the hand washing. So we'll set a goal, perhaps instead of washing their hands for 5 or 10 minutes straight and using, 10 different, pumps of soap or whatever their habit is, that we're going to set a timer, and when they feel the need to wash their hands, they're only going to wash for 1 minute and be done. So if that's our first step goal, then our next step might be 30 seconds of hand washing. It might be keeping data. So how many times a day is our child engaging in compulsive hand washing? And we're going to try to reduce the frequency. So if they've been hand washing 20 times a day, we might reduce that to 10, reduce that to 5, or have only hand washing after using the bathroom and before eating food, which is really our healthy norm in hand washing, and reducing the duration or the amount of time they hand wash each time. But it might take many steps on the ladder to slowly encourage our children to reduce that compulsive behavior in little baby steps they can tolerate. But each time we take that next step in changing the behavioral response, anxiety will increase. So if we're going to reduce hand washing to, say, 1 minute on a timer, at first our child is going to feel very anxious turning the faucet off at that 1 minute. And that is how we know we're doing an effective exposure, that it does bring on some anxiety, but we don't go into panic. It's a medium level challenge. The anxiety will peak and begin to subside as we walk away from the bathroom, use distraction, use self-regulating coping skills such as breathing, positive self-talk, keeping the body relaxed, maybe finding effective distraction through an activity or social support. But we want there to be a little bit of anxiety only at a level our child can manage once they've been learning some self-regulation coping skills to calm down the stress in their nervous system. So we'll reduce that to a goal that our child can handle, but is still a challenge. And then once that becomes easy, we'll take that next step up the ladder and do the next level of exposure with response prevention practice. For younger kids, it might be helpful to tie these goals to a reward, knowing that sometimes our children are completely scared of resisting OCD. It really feels like OCD is almost a magical, powerful influence that could punish you if you don't do the compulsions as commanded. And so there can be genuine fear for our children, especially early on, as we set these goals for them to start to conquer their OCD. So we might think about rewards for each little baby step our child is able to take on and celebrate their little successes. We then, as they've made a little bit of progress, want them to reflect back and realize that they've made some headway. And look, nothing bad is happening. You're reducing your hand washing, your skin is healing, you have more of your power back, you're getting more of your time back. And look, this is healthy. nothing bad is happening. This is progress. And to reward and celebrate that with them. Now, I'll tell you, often when I have seen children that have OCD, they have kind of hooked their parents into their compulsive habits. So they've talked their parents into engaging in some level of the OCD behavior, allowing them to avoid, accommodating them, kind of scrambling in different parental ways to try to reduce their child's anxiety. And first of all, that is totally understandable. It is awful and painful to see your child suffering with something as excruciating as OCD. And so we just are trying desperately to help our children be able to function. But that often means that we've become part of the compulsive ritual. So if this is where you find yourself, self-compassion, know that everything you're doing is coming from a place of love and good intentions for your child, but also realize that you have to start removing yourself from the OCD game. So you would maybe sit down with your child outside of an acute OCD anxiety moment and tell them, I'm learning more about OCD. I'm really trying to study and become an expert so I can help you more effectively. And I'm learning that I've accidentally become part of OCD's bossy bullying game plan. And I love you too much to continue to allow OCD to force me to do things that I know are holding you back from conquering OCD. And I know you might be a little mad at me or feel like this is mean, but I'm not going to do this thing for you anymore. One example that comes to mind for me is I've seen children who have an OCD goodnight ritual. So they need to go through this regimented ritual before bedtime of possibly saying goodnight and I love you over and over again, demanding that mom and dad repeat back the same script, having a rigid routine of I do my bedtime getting ready in this order, then prayers, then cuddles, and it's very rigid and the whole family's kind of drawn into this ritual. And so what we want to do with our children is start to require more flexibility. So we want to alter that script or resist repeating things a certain number of times or shorten things up so that it's not taking up so much time. And again, at first, this will push your child into some anxiety. They're not going to like the change. It will feel uncomfortable. They might even get desperate and have a meltdown or fight with you to make you do the ritual the way that you've always done it. And you have to stay calm, reflect back on the OCD being the bad guy and saying, I love you too much to keep feeding OCD. He'll keep getting stronger and more powerful and a bigger bully in your life if we keep giving in to that part of your brain. We have to be strong, resist, boss him back, and refuse to let OCD run the show anymore. So we'll often want to kind of think about how we're fighting against an enemy with OCD. And every time that we let OCD boss us around and we give in and do the compulsion, it's like feeding him a cookie and helping him grow and get stronger. Versus if OCD tries to boss us around and we can go, oh, that's an OCD thing. I'm not going to do that, or I'm going to change it up or do less of it. Then we're starving the beast, right? So don't feed the beast, starve the beast. Don't keep giving in, because then what we're doing is exercising that neural pathway that's really dysfunctional and this ever-increasing false alarm anxiety disorder. So I'd highly recommend that book by Bonnie Zucker, Take Control of OCD. There's a whole YouTube channel specific to OCD therapy that you might check out. I can't remember his name, but there's a male therapist that has a channel for OCD therapy. There are other great books out there to read, but you want to become an expert and you want to tackle this as early as possible. Now, I'll tell you, OCD can feel like a game of whack-a-mole, like that game in the arcade where you hit one thing over here and another one pops up over here. And OCD can be like that. It can be really frustrating. Say we've targeted hand washing, and now there becomes a compulsion in a different area. So be on the lookout for new compulsions arising as you try to eliminate and address one behavioral compulsion. There might be new behaviors that show up that have that compulsive drive to them. And again, those compulsions don't feel good, they're not pleasurable, they're rigid, and they tend to take up unnecessary amounts of time. So we want to help our kiddo say, hey, do you think that's OCD making you do this new behavior? I've noticed this is becoming a pattern. You're doing this a lot. And if they can recognize that, oh, that does have that same energy to it. There is a worried thought. There is that little bully in the brain telling me I have to. Then we know we have to add that to our goal list of compulsions to resist. Ultimately, we want children who have OCD to understand neuroplasticity in their brain and how our nervous system, though well-intended, wanting to protect us from harm, can accidentally develop these false alarm anxiety patterns. Those obsessive thoughts can be so scary and so worrisome that we can find these creative behaviors as a way to feel as if we're protected from that harm occurring. And we have to teach the brain that, in fact, there isn't danger in only washing my hands a normal amount of times per day. And while there is uncertainty around illness, that is normal, that there's no way to guarantee certainty no matter how often we wash our hands or whatever the case may be. So we have to teach our children to recognize that the anxiety is there probably because there is some risk in life and we can't find certainty or guarantee of safety. And our brain has been creative trying to find these compulsive behaviors that give us a false sense of safety and security. But we have to learn in life ultimately to accept some area of uncertainty and risk, to be in the present moment and look for evidence of any danger in front of me right now, and to give myself permission to relax into the present moment in which seemingly all is well. And I can reassure my brain through changing worried thoughts to strong positive coping thoughts, using my breath as a safety signal back to the brain, relaxing my face, having sense of humor, laughter, high-powered posture, so really staying in a sense of power in the body versus danger, and using things like good nutrition, daily exercise, healthy sleep habits, reducing sugar so our blood sugar stays stable and balanced throughout the day. So all of these things can be really helpful in allowing our children to find a sense of empowerment and a personal toolkit that can allow them to, over time, fade away those OCD brain pathways and rewire the brain towards more sense of present moment awareness, confidence, safety, and accepting uncertainty where we have to. Thank you for sticking with me through this. I would recommend you go back and look at my other lecture on parenting an anxious child, and possibly reading Dr. Bonnie Zucker's book is the best resource I have found to give you pretty comprehensive cognitive behavioral therapy tools that teach you exposure with response prevention. Keep learning about coping skills, be strategic how you work with your child at home. The most important thing is to help your child build their own self-awareness, to recognize their own patterns in obsessive thought, compulsive behavior, and fight to get their freedom back and to boss back that bully in their brain, find their empowerment in their life, and hold this intention of growing up and being free of these OCD nuisances and making sure to not reinforce the brain towards OCD getting worse over time. And you as a parent being compassionate and patient, but also that loving alpha of setting the boundaries where you have control, removing yourself from participating in OCD rituals as much as possible, rewarding and praising your child for finding the courage to fight back and resist giving in to OCD, knowing that over time that is the biggest act of love to help your child overcome their OCD and help your child find their way towards optimal mental health. Thank you for joining me at Root Cause of Happiness. If this information was useful to you, please share it with others seeking knowledge and tools for resilience. It is a meaningful contribution to the world when we become proactive in our healing journeys, by learning and growing, by increasing our awareness, by addressing the root cause of happiness.